Step into the world of mysteries with us here at Paranormal M. We bring you stories that'll make you rethink the limits of human understanding. Don't forget to subscribe. Throw some comments down there. And also activate notifications to stay current with our latest mind-bending narratives. We hope you have an enlightening time listening. Story number 1. An encounter and weird instances in my old apartment. I was a minor when all of this happened. Take it with a grain of salt if you'd like to. At the time, I lived with my father, stepmother, and siblings in a triplex apartment. Our family dynamic was quite abusive and unsettling. To top it off, our apartment seemed to harbor eerie occurrences, including the inexplicable sound of dining room chairs dragging at night, and footsteps on the staircase when everyone was asleep. 3 incidents particularly shook me. Firstly, I frequently experienced sleep paralysis and lucid dreams. One of the dreams took place within the old colonial building that we resided in. Strangely, I felt completely normal in this dream, just casually walking around, despite the odd ambience of the setting. It was weird because the lift was working. It never worked when we lived there. The wall paint looked newer in comparison to the doors to each apartment. They all looked different. Almost like I went years back. The most terrifying incident happened when my father and stepmother went on a trip, leaving us alone with an older cousin. One night while I was alone in my room with the lights off, the TV was on very loud music, I saw a woman. She was stunningly beautiful, but otherworldly, with curly hair, black eyes, dilated pupils, and olive skin. She just kept staring at me. I froze. Her gaze sent chills down my spine. Couldn't discern whether it was malicious or simply empty. I screamed and fled my room, seeking refuge with my cousin, who immediately rang my uncle and aunt, who stayed with us that night. Sometimes our stereo would turn on by itself, blaring at maximum volume. Eventually, we moved to a larger place, but years later when we returned to this old apartment, strange events persisted. This time I didn't see any apparitions, but I heard my guitar strings being played, and some whistling, all originating from my room where I first saw her. I was not alone, so I knew I wasn't imagining these occurrences. To this day, I regret not discovering the identity of that mysterious woman, or whatever she was. As an adult, my curiosity about that encounter has only grown. She was one of the few ghosts that I ever did see. Story number 2. Silent Rock MT, Hood, Oregon. I mainly joined to see what I could find on Silent Rock, and it wasn't much. I grew up in a small town 15 miles from Silent Rock, which is on Highway 26, heading up to Mount Hood, Oregon. I've heard all the stories growing up. There's plenty from Native American burial grounds, many deaths, and strange occurrences. If you're from here, you'll know when you get close to the rock you're supposed to turn your music off and not talk until you pass, or something horrible might happen to you. Something did almost happen to me, and it was a miracle I made it down the mountain. But that's not why I'm writing this. Nobody has ever ventured below the rock. Kinda hard to get, but one day I decided I would attempt to get there. I hiked down and made it. I brought a trail cam, a compass, and a few other items. I didn't get any weird quote-unquote feels when I was down there, but my compass was going all over the place. I spent about 30 minutes down there and put up my trail cam in a nice sneaky spot. I came back with the more expensive compass a week later, and also to grab that trail cam. Once I got down there, the cam was gone. Spent 70 minutes looking everywhere, and I just couldn't find it. The new compass I brought down there was doing the same thing. I'm no genius here, but what else can I bring? If it wasn't such a rough hike, I would bring a ladder to mount a cam higher, but that's just impossible. Something weird is definitely going on. I'm going to try to stay the night down there this weekend. The forecast showing sunny, mostly. But that's the last weekend before the snow hits. Story number 3. Hearing, seeing, and experiencing things. If this is the right place to post, since I don't have any video or pictures to prove it, but I've had strange things happen that I can't explain, and I don't know who to talk to about it without sounding crazy. Sorry for the cow in the background, guys. I'll try to explain what's happened without it getting too confusing. The first occurrence was about 2018. I was babysitting my niece, who was just a little baby at the time. While she was taking a nap behind me on the couch, I was sitting on the ground watching TV, and out of the corner of my eye, I see a lady in 1800s type dress, just staring at me. Took a step towards me, but the moment I looked over at where she was standing, she was gone. The rest of that day I was there, I could see figures walking past out of the corner of my eyes, but never when I was looking directly at where they were. The second time I was sitting in a different apartment that my sister lived in, and I heard someone calling my name, and it sounded like an old lady. And my niece came running and saying, "She's calling for you." My sister and her boyfriend were in the room too, but they didn't hear anything at all, and no one else was in the apartment too. The last time something really strange happened was in 2020. My sister died, and we had shirts made with her picture and name on it. The name of the funeral, I took the shirt off, the night of the funeral, I took the shirt off and put it on the back of a chair with her picture facing up. I closed the door and went to sleep in my niece's room with her. The next morning I came into my room and the shirt was inside out on my bed, which was across the room from the chair. These were the top 3 occasions that were really weird things that have happened. But I do see shadow figures walk by, especially in an old house I used to live in, where the owner apparently passed and died in as well. Story number 4. Weird experience in Canyonlands at night. This happened only a week ago. My girlfriend and I were visiting the Arches in Canyonlands for the weekend, and ended up heading out pretty late from Moab to get into the Canyonlands, which is about a 45-minute or an hour drive. A few years previous, I'd gone there myself and stayed until the moon rose, because that meant people were leaving, and, as a field recordist, that meant a quiet environment to record in. That night in 2020, the moon was bright, and there were a few night photographers there as I ended up hanging out with them in particular, and it was generally a surreal experience. I felt completely safe. Hoping to have a similar time again with girlfriend along for the ride, and forgetting the fact that maybe the clouds would largely block moonlight that night, I drove us up. It was pretty dark before we even made it 15 minutes along the drive there. Having been there, more specifically Mesa Arch, twice before, and this being a borderline spiritual place for me, I didn't even think about danger or anything of the sort. Despite that, I had a sixth sense type of gut feeling pretty early on that we shouldn't head up there that night. Not wanting to freak myself out, or my girlfriend, I didn't say anything or really think much of it, and chalked it up to just being nervous because it was dark. There was a certain vibe along the roads leading up, and we noticed that there were people leaving the park, but no one coming in ahead or behind us. The instinct to not continue hit me subtly a few more times, and I kept pushing it away like an idiot. I've been very familiar with these instincts over the past years, and they've served me well, as far as I can tell. I think I genuinely thought I was just scared because it was dark. We ended up at the Mesa Arch parking lot, where 2 cars were packing up and heading out. When they left, it was almost completely dark, with only the faintest glow of moon showing through the clouds, and not a person around anywhere near us. Canyonlands is pretty remote. We get our backpacks on, grab a couple of things, and my girlfriend makes sure I've got my CCW. She doesn't usually care much, but this struck me as an indication that she was maybe concerned too. We start heading up. It's a pretty short trail, maybe a quarter mile. All we wanted to do was get to this little bowl-like area, the main destination, and hang out and record some sounds. The area is pretty open, with trees both live and dead scattered around, bushes and a small cactus or two, rocky slopes that can be climbed in a few seconds. It's a pretty dope scene in daytime. I've never felt uneasy here previously. We'd been doing a bit of travel vlogs so far, so I continued doing that, and I genuinely get goosebumps and chills every single time I think about this part. It was the weirdest feeling I've ever felt. I felt instinctually like, I should get out of here, I'm being watched. Things like that. Those type of feelings. And I've had several stories to tell from those, but I've never felt what I felt while vlogging. This might not seem relevant, but for context, the field recording I do is largely gathering wood and rock sounds. Canyonlands, Navajo sandstone, juniper wood, both of which sound wonderful when tumbled and rolled around. I think of field recording as an art. Yep. But also as a way to appreciate a land in a closer way, at least for me, than just taking pictures of it. I feel like I'm capturing the essence of a location in a very respectful way. As I'm vlogging, I felt something I can only describe as a need to show that I was there peacefully and with respectful intent. I didn't hear anything or see anything that would indicate that I needed to show I was here on peaceful business, but I felt it so strongly. Again, I didn't want to scare my girlfriend, so I didn't say this. I figured I was just feeling on edge being in or near complete darkness. We could barely see our own feet on this easy and open trail. We'd kept our lamps off to let our eyes adjust to the glow, but I turned mine on to read a plaque. My girlfriend mentioned I should probably turn it off so I don't create shadows and freak us out, so I turned it back off. I also felt like I was spotlighting myself by having it on, and I was about to turn it back off before she even said that. We continued, and the uneasiness only grew. This lasted until we both reached the same exact spot on the trail and stopped at the same time, in silence. I think we should go back, my girlfriend added, and I agreed. Never have I felt a stronger feeling of being unwelcome in a place. Felt like we hit a barrier. Not only did I feel unwelcome, it was more particularly the feeling of intruding on a congregation or meeting or gathering that we were not invited to. I don't know how to describe this feeling at all besides that, and it was not a conscious thought. It was just there, as these kinds of instincts tend to be. At that point, I realized I'd been ignoring these feelings long enough, and it was most certainly time to go. I have no idea what was going on in that little bowl that we were about to reach, but I didn't want to find out. We made our way quickly back to the car. As soon as we get back, we hear a large pack of coyotes quite nearby, but in the opposite direction we'd been heading on the trail. If we'd continued on that trail, it was not coyotes that we would have run into. Still, this felt like an additional cue to leave. My girlfriend said, "That's our cue." I badly wanted to record their yips, but common sense took over and we got the hell out of there. The road, completely devoid of any sign of other people, was particularly eerie. Driving back wasn't just trying to get back to our campsite in Moab. It felt like we were escaping, like when you turn off the lights and run up the stairs. Now relatively safe in our car, we discussed what has just happened. Every single unspoken, strong gut feeling I had had, my girlfriend had felt too, and was exactly the same things at the same times, nonetheless. Both felt the need to show something or someone that we meant no harm by vlogging and being chill outwardly. Both felt multiple times, both on the drive there and on the trail, that we shouldn't go. Both felt at the time that we were like actors on a stage being watched by a multitude of something. Both felt unwelcome, like we were crashing a party. Both felt that we needed to go at the same exact point on the trail. None of these were spoken aloud to each other at any point until we were back on the road. As we drove, the moon became visible for a bit. I'm not familiar with moon stuff, but it had been a full moon a few days before, and that night it was large, not full though, and red. This was because of the red sand in the air from the windy day. But my girlfriend said that also meant bad juju. Should always listen to your girlfriend. Looking into the history of that region and even stories of strange happenings at Mesa Arch, I am sure that we avoided something strange or dangerous. Story number 5. The Old Riders of the Pony Express. Back in 2015, I worked at a museum dedicated to the Pony Express and the success of the mail service. The museum is actually the old stables where they used to keep the horses. It was the jumping-off point where the first rider believed to be Johnny Fry would ride across the Missouri River into Kansas at the first station. If you're ever in St. Joseph, Missouri, and looking for something to do, it's worth checking out. Anyway, back to the story. I used to work weekends and was often by myself, sending visitors on self-guided tours of the museum. There's always been a rumor in the museum that it's haunted by the ghosts of a few of the stable hands, riders, and even horses of past years. My best friend at the time and I would yell across the stables to the spirits to keep the stables safe until we opened the next day. One day in particular, after we closed for the day, I noticed on the CCTV that there was a man standing across from the mock log cabin that sat across from the diorama where all of the audio and visual effects would begin. He was dressed in all dark western wear with a large black cowboy hat, leaning against the cabin. as the sound effect of a thunderstorm across the plains flashed and clapped violently. I closed up the gift shop doors and made my way around the stables. Coming up to the point where I saw the cowboy, I yelled throughout the museum that we had closed up for the night. A huge blast of cold air rushed through me as my heart dropped to my feet. I really didn't want to go near the man, but I didn't want to show that I was afraid. As I got to the cabin, I looked around the corner and the man was gone. I practically sped-walked through the rest of the museum, yelling that we were closed and that he needed to leave. As I reached the end and backed up to the gift shop, there was no sign of him. I checked all the doors and everything was locked up tight. There was absolutely no way he could have gotten out of the locked doors and just locked everything behind him in the process. I called my best friend and had her come over to walk me to my car. I told her the whole story. She said it's the ghost of one of the riders that she saw months before. As I locked up, I felt pretty comfortable enough to know that my mind was playing tricks on me, perhaps. I yelled again to the spirits to protect the stables until I came back the next day. That's where we heard it. Loud clumping of boots on the stable floor with spurs jangling and the low grunt of a horse snorting. We ran back to the stables and looked all around, but there was nobody there. I have several other experiences from this place, including a strange encounter with a homeless man following me home, but that's another story for another time. If anyone is interested, I've since left that job, and I still have a love and appreciation for living history, but the ghosts of the Pony Express will forever haunt my mind. Story number 6. The Woman on the Platform. Years ago, when I was a young troublemaker, I was on my way to a community service roadside center. My commute required I take a bus and several metros, city rail trains, early in the morning as the godforsaken community service started at 6 a.m. So, at about 4:30 a.m., I got off the first metro and walked down the platform in order to wait for the second metro. I was early, so there weren't many people, a few guys on their way to work and a random hobo here and there. But I noticed a woman standing against one of the platform pillars. She struck me as odd, as she's dressed in a way that showed off her body shape. But the weird thing was no one seemed to notice her. Not the hobos, not the guys waiting to go to work. She stood there, staring at me. I was mildly fascinated, as she was attractive, apart from her lack of attention from others. There was nothing else obviously strange about this woman. And as I was having a last look at her, the metro pulled up, and I walked in, found a seat, and wondered if the chick got onto the metro herself, as she was waiting on the same side of the platform as me. But no, she was still standing against the pillar, staring at me in a real sad way. I remember. I also remember seeing her as the train rolled off. We locked eyes and said goodbye. 2 stops later, I arrived at my stop and got off the metro and to the platform and started walking down the stairs. I had to stop walking halfway down as the woman I had just seen at the last metro station was walking up the stairs on the side which walks up, and she was just staring at me with that sad face. I ran back up when I caught my wits again. She was not there anymore on that platform. Story number 7. The Wish for Vengeance. A few years ago, when I was a young person in the wrong path spiritually, a very wrong path, I had a chance to ponder the true nature of this existence. Let me begin my story by saying that I used to be a demon worshiper, a so-called Satanist. And I had a job which I started at around 12:30 a.m. and ended at around 12 p.m. Monday through Saturday. One night I cut myself pretty bad. I told my boss. He wanted me to go home and then go see a doctor. It wasn't bad enough for a seeing your bones sort of a thing. But I just took the day off, but I still had to drive home. This was around 2:30 a.m., and it was raining a bit, but at this time the freeway was empty, so I'm driving kinda chill, 'cause I get to go home, relax, call up a chick, etc. When out of nowhere a bright red Ferrari blasts right past me, swerved into my lane, and brake-checked me pretty hard in the rain. I almost panicked but managed to keep control as I was driving the speed limit, 65 miles an hour. But this made me so fucking upset. I was fucking pissed this motherfucker almost killed me, just to show off his shit in a literally fucking empty 6-lane highway. Man, I was incredibly angry at this motherfucker, like if every single bad shit that ever happened to me was that person's fault. That kind of upset. So I quickly reasoned that my vehicle had no chance in hell of catching up to the Ferrari in order to, I don't know, maybe shake my fist at him, call him a bitch or something. I don't know. But nah, I'd never ever catch up. He hit the gas, turned into a little ass dot in the highway. Well, I focused all my anger and asked Satan to please revenge himself for me, as I couldn't drive fast enough to catch up. I begged him and prayed hard as fuck with the complete heart that I wanted that motherfucker to be destroyed, or to suffer equally to my anger. A few minutes later I realized, unpuckered my asshole and kept pushing. I even got to forget about that shit that happened as soon as I had a look for my lighter to get a cigarette going. I drove a ways to get home. I had to exit the highway and enter a different highway, let's say the 5 to the 71, and noticed that a few miles up traffic was starting to stack, and with all the red brake lights it looked cool as fuck. I swear that you can see pretty far down this highway, and that shit looked like a red carpet laid out against the night sky. Anyways, when I got to the scene which caused the traffic jam itself, it was the red Ferrari turned to shit against the center divider. I whooped and hollered and smiled, and that was the best damn smoke I'd ever had until then. For fuck's sake, I was feeling ecstatic and just thanking the thing that I had received help from, over and over. Sorry for all those F-bombs, people. Story number 8. I'm being followed by Mama. It all started in 2013. I was 12 at the time. My older sister and her friend, who were 14 or 15 at the time, were playing with a newly bought Ouija board in our basement. My sister invited me to the basement. I had heard about Ouija boards before, but never seen one myself. I always followed my sister's lead, so I joined them in playing without question. It was all relatively normal. Yes and no. Short answer questions. I honestly thought they were probably fucking with me because it was working. I'm not a skeptic, but also not a full believer. I was also young, so I don't remember the details perfectly. I do remember telling the board that we were going to watch a movie and say goodbye, sliding the pointer over to the bottom of the board, as they had apparently read online. The movie my sister and her friend were about to watch was a horror movie called Mama, capital M-A-M-A. They had all talked about it several times. They went on Netflix, and as soon as they pressed play on the Wii, the Netflix disconnected. I believe she said the lights also flickered. I don't recall that part. We played again the next day, and the board, it spelled out M-A-M-A every time that it seemed to not want to answer a question. And it would get more intense every time, moving quicker and spelling it out multiple times. It got to the point that the pointer would fall off the board and we would have to reset it. This freaked us all out a little bit. We all accused each other of moving the pointer, but none of us did. Our Netflix was down for months after this. Our parents were pretty annoyed about it, but we never told them why it had happened. My sister wanted nothing to do with the board after that and gave it to me. I thought it was pretty cool, so I continued playing with it for years. And every single time I played, I always talked to this same spirit or entity. And every time I played, it would be the intense mama movement. I played it off for years and made a joke of it. My friends would get so freaked out by it that they would quote-unquote test me to make sure I wasn't moving it on my own. They would make me turn my back to the board while we played the board and was always able to give answers no one knew the answers to. I only ever tried to play by myself once, which I had heard was dangerous, but of course I ignored everyone. I was in my basement where it all started a few years prior. I was on FaceTime with a friend to show her, as well as take a video on my phone to prove to my friends at school. The board was spelling out random letters that I couldn't make sense of. Then there was a bang on the door beside me. I even caught that on video. I didn't play for a while after that. I would dabble in the board here and there throughout the years, and always talk to the spirit that we just called Mama, as we assumed that she was just impersonating the movie from night one. Things would happen through the years, lights turning off and on at night, lots of strange noises, and our very calm dog was terrified of our basement and would freak out about nothing while down there. Fast forward to now. I'm 22. My sister is 23. We told her mother the whole story this past summer. Our mom is very spiritual, so we always tried to hide it from her. She recalled when the Netflix was broken and how frustrated she was, and we all joked about it. My sister and I got a text from her a few days later saying, "Tell Mama to give me my Netflix back." We joked about it, nothing happened. She asked us again to tell Mama to fix the Netflix. We both took it seriously this time and said out loud to plead for her to let the Netflix come back. And it actually seemed to work. We were surprised that it worked, but I brushed it off like I always do. I just can't comprehend how this could be true, but also, how could it not be? This can't all be a coincidence. Well, the other night, I received a call from my sister that shook me to my core. She had told her boyfriend, who was a disbeliever, the whole story the night before. The same story we had told our mom a couple of months prior. The next morning when she awoke, she was met with her pale boyfriend in a state of total confusion and disbelief. He recounted being awoken in the middle of the night to a little girl standing at the end of the bed. She had a metal cage and a bar over her mouth. She was confused by this, but he wasn't frightened by the girl. He almost felt bad for her. He swore he was awake when this happened, and as a disbeliever couldn't understand what was going on. My sister called her mom and recounted the story to her. Our mother replied, "Oh my God, you guys are Mama." She's been calling for her mama this whole time. My sister immediately hung up and called me to tell me. We both got full-body chills and started crying. It all makes sense. The intense mama repetitions and calls for attention. What still doesn't make sense is her boyfriend's dream. Why him? Why the cage? Who is Mama truly? Why has she been following us and trying to make contact for the past decade? Story number 9. Many more encounters happened to me here, and here's a few of them. Strange events in my past. Over the course of my life, I was always spiritual and sensitive, but I'm too fearful to open that door. I'm going to recall as many situations as I can. Dreamt I was going to lose someone close to me in a helicopter crash. 1 month later, my best friend was killed in a helicopter crash. Dreamt the girl I was interested in died, and I could see her tombstone, but feeling she was endangered. Found out the next day she was rushed to the hospital because an attempt was taken on her own life. Hanging out at a friend's house at night, outside, saw spirits in the corner of my eye. The feeling was that they wanted to go to his house, but couldn't. I told my friend, and he freaked out and told me that when he was young, they had a spiritual attack in their home. Toys had no batteries that would go off, things like that. He didn't go into much detail because he was terrified, but he said a priest was called to help his family and home. Dreamt a dark shadow figure shut my mouth. Me being held, freed my mouth, demanded its name, and it told me jeers. It was stuck in my dream. Only the words Jesus helped me freed me. A few other dark shadows dreams, but I need to find my dream book. I get raging angry at anything like Ouija boards, like pit bulls crazy mad. Many years passed, but last week I randomly became bitter about a loved one's actions to another family member. And that same day, their plane needed to make an emergency landing. Story number 10. Ask Reddit. I'm normally pretty logical about seeing weird things. I work nights, and I go long periods of time without sleeping, so my mind playing tricks isn't super unusual. But this happened in broad daylight with other people around, and it's left me completely confused as to what actually happened. I was repairing a condenser in a very standard-looking suburban neighborhood. Directly across the street was a mother playing in her driveway with her toddler, pushing him around in one of those plastic cars. I was walking back to my work van around the side of the house when I hear a shriek, like a noise that you hear and know something is about to be hurt. I took a very quick step to clear the corner of the house and see what was happening. Mother across the street didn't seem to notice, or hear, or care. That's when I heard it again, but being in front of the house, I could pinpoint a little bit better. My head snapped to the house directly to the right of one of the mothers that she was out in front of. I saw a small child staring directly at me with its mouth wide open and eyes that seemed to be completely black all the way around its eye socket. I looked at the mother. Sure, she had to have noticed this, or at least hear the commotion. She didn't. The thing waved, not like a come here motion, but more so acknowledging its awareness of me. I walked slowly back to the condenser and hid for maybe 5 minutes. When I came back around, it was gone, and the mother was carrying on like nothing had even happened. I had no explanation for what happened to myself, and I still don't. When I went home and began to tell my girlfriend what had happened, she told me about black-eyed children. I don't know what I saw that day. There was something so deeply unsettling about the entire situation. I'm happy calling it a cryptid if it means I'll never see them ever again. Story number 11. Having insomnia as a kid. I've been frequently reading the sub, on and off, reading of people asking for guidance. information and techniques to succeed. The reason I'm writing this is because I'm asking a question of something that I've experienced when I was younger. My last recollection of several events I can recall when I was 6 years old, I believed. That's the time that it was about the late 90s. Those times when you're a kid with the attention span of a goldfish, sat in front of a dumb box to watch animated toons or the broadcast views. Anyway, I'm going off topic here. What I'm trying to say here is that when I was young, I couldn't sleep at night. Both of my parents would be asleep, but I would go to my living room and play in the dark. I remember I didn't make that much sound to wake my parents. While tiring myself with the shenanigans in the dark, I head back to sleep eventually. Walking toward my bed, I saw an animated, colorful spirit sprouting inside the dark bedroom. It came out of the darkness, out of a void. I'm awestruck and wonder. My little kid mind couldn't comprehend what I was seeing at that moment. What's that? I pondered. It looked really cool. Like I'm hallucinating, but how though? I'm only 6 years old at that time. After that event, more spooky shit happened to me. Story number 12. Red bean paste in a dream. So before I explain, I want to say that I had no idea what red bean paste even was until recently, and only found out what it looks like after the dream. Anyway, there's this dream that I had. I wake up in a strange mountain desert area by a cliff, and immediately I notice a cave entrance. So the dream just sort of dream me, I guess you could say. Takes interest, I guess, and I go inside that cave, dimly lit by the light spilling in, and a warm reddish glow from a big bowl in the center filled with a reddish-brown mushy-like substance, which I later realized was red bean paste. The paste in the bowl didn't show any plausible means of emitting a red glow, yet it was glowing, and scattered around the ground by the cave walls are piles and piles of more red bean paste. And perhaps the strangest part is that while in the dream I have this overwhelming feeling of déjà vu, like I'd been in that cave numerous times. But I've never experienced déjà vu inside of a dream before. I didn't even think it was possible until now. After having the dreams, I decided to look up anything about the stuff, because my first thought was, maybe it could be a religious offering. And the only thing I found was that apparently Koreans believed that eating red bean paste can ward off evil spirits. Also, it might have been the wind, but I swear in the dream I could hear whispers in that cave. Probably not relevant, though. Story number 13. Binky Stealing Ghost. I have 2 kids. When my first was a baby, Binkies always seemed to disappear. Like out of thin air almost. I know it's easy to think that I misplaced them or something, but I'm serious. I would tear the entire house apart looking for this one specific Binky because it was the only one that she would take. I had recently had a run-in with my TV remote vanishing as well, and after some advice from a friend, I decided to ask the house to please return the stuff to me, quote-unquote. So I did. Then I took a nap with the baby. Within an hour, after a week of the remote being missing, the remote returned on top of my AC, which, by the way, I messed with very frequently and was right next to the couch that I was pretty much always on. The top was also dusty, and there was no dust-free mark underneath the remote. It's like it was just put there. I was shocked, weirded out, scared. I was completely alone at the house pretty much all the time, so it wasn't a roommate or anything. Shortly after that, the binky started getting taken. Every time I couldn't find it after a few days, I would beg the house for it back, and it would return in plain sight. Once it even was placed in my hand while I was sleeping, and I was woken by the sudden feeling of it dropping in my hand. That one freaked me out. I don't know when it stopped, but eventually it did. There were other paranormal encounters in the house, but it seemed like separate occurrences. Now it's years later. I live in a different house, a different state, and a new baby. I had a lot of binkies sitting on the side table next to the couch. Probably like 8. Only like 3 are left. And we checked the house. Yet I'm feeling very, very uneasy. I figured whatever it was lived in the house. Now I'm worried something is attached to me. Maybe it's been so for a long time. Does anyone have any idea what this could be? Story number 14. I think something is in my room. Last night I was going to bed with my radiator on, and it was on the brink of, or rather I was on the brink of falling asleep. I usually hear creaking and stuff near my desk setup, but usually never pay any attention or any worry to it. My radiator makes some cracking sounds, which is normal. But just as I was about to fall asleep, I hear 2 loud taps and knocks that definitely did not sound like the noise my radiator makes. I couldn't exactly pinpoint where it was coming from, but it sounded like it was being made on wood from the attic. This isn't the first time I've experienced this, as I have a door in my room that connects to my bathroom, and heard 3 loud knocks on it late at night once. I've heard footsteps coming from my attic, and they definitely did not sound like rats or mice or any piping. They were very heavy and lasted for a bit. I've had my cases of sleep paralysis in this room as well. The most terrifying sleep paralysis I had was I saw a girl with a teddy bear who looked like she was from the 60s, and then another time where I had an empty bag of chips on my desk, and I could hear the bag being crushed and rustled. After hearing the 2 loud taps and knocks last night, I opened my eyes and went on my phone to play Hunaman Chalisa, and also turned on my LED lights. After I started to play it on Spotify, my phone just put my phone down and my phone volume went to mute without me doing anything at all. I then felt a very strong presence in my room and felt like something was watching me, and it made me feel pretty scared and nervous. I then decided to go to a different room to sleep in. The most weird part is that no one else in my family has experienced these things, and it's just me that's experienced these situations in my house. Any ideas on what I can do to get this to stop? Story number 15. 2 ghostly experiences. 1. This is the most recent of the 2. My husband and I were in Deadwood, South Dakota, and did a haunted tour at the Fairmont. Early in the tour guide brought us into a room and had us sit down while explaining the history of the building. She explained the room that we were in didn't typically have any activity, so it was a good place to chat. As she's talking about some of the deaths in the building, I suddenly feel about 3 to 5 strands of my hair gecko. Right along my part on the top of my head, get pulled straight up and out of my head. I turned around and silently smacked my husband, but he was confused. I didn't say anything to the tour guide or any other people on the tour because I was convinced that my husband was playing a joke on me. He swore up and down that he didn't even touch me. By the end of the tour, I started to believe him, but I started questioning myself. Did I want something to happen so bad that I made it up in my head? But I know I didn't because I feel the strong sting of the hairs being ripped out. And that feeling lingers on, and I know I couldn't have imagined it. So if anyone else experiences hair pulling in Deadwood, you aren't alone. 2. This one happened when I was a child. I believe I was in 5th grade at the time. My parents had gone out for the night and I was home alone. I had our house phone, and I was on the phone talking to my best friend. To set the scene, there was a hallway with a computer room on one side, and the bathroom on the other, and my parents' room at the end of the hallway. I'm in the computer room with the lights off, but I had the hallway light on. I was standing by the window in the dark computer room, leaning against the ledge, and absently looking across to our neighbor's house while talking on the phone. The neighbors had a window with a lamp on, but the blinds were closed, so it was just a soft yellow glow, and that's all I could see. Suddenly, as I'm talking, I see in the reflection of the window that I'm leaning against, a man in a red flannel shirt walking down the hallway from my parents' room, past the computer room that I'm in. Clear as day, I saw this. I can still picture it now. My dog was in the room with me. He was a big German short-haired pointer, and he was the ultimate guard dog. I got scared and hung up the phone, but I didn't know what to do, so I decided that I would run across the hallway into the bathroom and lock the door until I calmed down. I wanted to bring my dog, but as soon as we got to the doorway by the hallway, my dog dug his paws in, put his hackles up, and started growling at the hallway. He wouldn't move. At this point, I started crying, and I gave him one big yank on his collar, took off and ran, without me, straight into the bathroom. I went in after him, closed the door, calmed myself down. Then my friend called me back for hanging up on her, and I explained everything. I don't think she believed me. No one else was home. My parents didn't come back early. My stepdad didn't even own a red flannel shirt. I had no clue who I saw, but I saw him, full-bodied. I would give anything to go back to that house for a night and do a ghost hunt. Story number 16. My deceased uncle won't rest in peace, and I need advice. Last year, my uncle died from lung cancer. He was diagnosed on the 4th of April, and he died around the 20th the same month. But it was really a rough time for all of us. But we took some solace in the fact that he died surrounded by our family, considering he was divorced and spent most of his life alone and bitter about that fact. Then the dreams started. Both my brother, sister's father, and mother and I had dreams about him. Most of the time he was thankful, like one time when he thanked my sister for taking care of his crib. She inherited his apartment, which he loved and cared for a lot. However, most of the time we agreed on one thing. He was not resting in peace. In fact, one fact tied all of our dreams together, really. The fact that he's not aware that he's dead. My father even told him in one dream, assertively, how he's dead and how he should move on. I had a dream where he told me he's proud of me, He hugged me and his skin was literally cold. It felt like touching a corpse. Last night I had another dream, and this one started to worry me. He was talking with my sister, joking around as he usually did, and then I realized his eyes became sunken and dead. The skin around his eyes became red. His face started sinking, and most of his mouth and nose rotted and fell apart. He was still talking. I don't know what to do. I loved my uncle a lot, and I hate the fact that he can't move on, that he can't abandon this world and his body, even while it's painfully obvious that he's dead. As a Christian, I do pray for his soul often, but it simply doesn't help thus far. Even after I hoped he would move on, this dream still happened. Story number 17. My first security post. 10 years ago, I started working for a security company as a guard. My first post was a place in Flint, Michigan called Diplomat Pharmacy. A little history of the place was originally a GM plant and the site of one of the sit-down strikes in the 40s. I started working third shift. Granted, I'm not a big fan of walking around in the dark, but it was what it was, And every night a patrol every 2 hours. It was wild. Constantly through the night I would hear footsteps. I would hear creaks and bumps. There was a constant feeling like I wasn't alone, and this was at 1 or 2 a.m. This went on a nightly basis. One time in particular I remember being on the 3rd floor. 3rd floor was easily the worst spot for me in the building. As I was patrolling, I was passing the elevator. Now, mind you, this is at 3 a.m., and as far as I know, I'm alone. As I'm walking the elevator, it kicks on, starts running. This was a bit alarming. The door to the elevator opened in front of me, and then this was once again on the 3rd floor, and there's nobody in there. Depending on what floor I was on, I would use the bathroom and the toilets would flush without being in use. Again, middle of the night, early morning, I eventually switched to 2nd shift. I thought worming in the day would be easier, and to a degree it was. One afternoon I was patrolling an office. Perfect sunny blue sky day. As I was passing, I saw a silhouette in the window, like someone staring inside the window, through the blinds. Now, I'm working in the city of Flint, so the idea of a homeless guy or a crackhead staring through the window wasn't a concept that I didn't consider. I raised the blind, nothing. Sunshine and blue sky. So I lowered the blind, and the same silhouette of what looked like someone standing at the window. Very strange place to work. Nor looking for advice, really, just these are the things that I've seen. My husband heard a burp that neither of us were guilty of. Wasn't me either. So to start off, we live in a pretty large but old house with this 87-year-old granny who is as polite as can be and tends to stay in her own space, which is on the 2nd story and we're on the 1st. The 3 of us are the only people who live there, and we have no animals besides a 1-year-old ball python. This morning, my husband came back in from smoking a cigarette on the front porch and laid back in bed with me, as I was half asleep and only halfway coherent. As he settles in beside me, he heard a loud belch that seemed to have come from a vanity area connected to our bedroom that leads to our bathroom, which is also 5 feet from our bed. Thinking reasonably, he assumed that I did it, to which I denied as I was still sleeping, and only vaguely heard the noise. Granny was upstairs in the shower. We know that because of the old creaky pipes in the attic above our room. Not even an hour after this, I heard a whisper about a foot away from me saying, "Hey." Thinking it was my husband, I asked him what was up, and he replied with confusion because he hadn't said anything to me for at least a good 10-15 minutes. We were sitting on our phones in complete silence. We've had some freaky things happen in this house before, but nothing this close to us. Story number 19. I'm so scared of this stuff, so I deny the existence of things I really have experienced. I have always felt presence or presences in others' houses. One time I was living with my surrogate father, and when I was going to sleep, it would feel like someone was sitting on the edge of the couch and patting my leg. It was a comforting presence. I never said anything to my surrogate father about it. One day he says he needs to talk to me outside. I go out on the porch and he tells me something was touching his bed last night. He said, "I was laying there, not asleep yet, and it felt like someone sat on the bed and was tapping my bed. I reached for my gun and it stopped." I then told him about my experience and that it didn't feel like a bad spirit. He didn't feel threatened either, just scared that it could be an intruder. I felt things as a child, and once me and my sister were playing rough and she pushed me and almost fell down the stairs. I swear to God, something held me and pushed me back to the landing. There was no logical or scientific reason I came flying forward when I was falling backwards down those stairs. I now feel something in my new house. I always feel like I'm being watched, and one day my daughter came over and she said, "Mom, I don't like it out here. I feel like someone's watching me." I had never mentioned to her or anyone that I felt like this, that, I was being watched. I told her not to worry, because I know fear can amplify some spirits. This spirit I feel here is scary. It feels not good. Now I sage my house, Palo Santo my house, and do salt lines at my doors. I don't feel anything inside, but I do feel it outside. Like it's watching me through my windows. Like it's watching me when I'm outside. I try to deny that I believe in this stuff because it terrifies me. If there's a way to cleanse the property, because I feel so uneasy and terrified around the spirit, I know I sound crazy, but I'm constantly feeling like I'm being watched since I moved in. Story number 20. Sleep paralysis and shadow people since I was a kid. I'm not fully sure if this is the right sub, but I'm going to try and sum up this part of the story so I can get to the actual point. When I was a kid, like 10, it was night. I went downstairs and me in my mother's apartment because she asked me to grab her Dr. Pepper, so I grabbed the Dr. Pepper, and when I turned around, I saw this shadow in front of me, like legit standing in front of me. It had no eyes, just like hollowness as it was carved out or something. The fingers were pointed like claws or a glove. But the head was like also looking pointed, but hung slumped to one side of the head like one of those old jester head hat things. I screamed, and when I blinked, it was gone. Now, since then, I don't know if it was a hallucination or a trick of the eye or what, as I was very young, like I've said, but for the last nearly 10 years since, and at every single apartment I've stayed at in those 10 years, nearly every couple of months I get sleep paralysis. At the time of writing this, I haven't had one in a couple of weeks, but always a shadow figure, always staring at me. If I was able to throw my body over or close my eyes, then I would hear the loud whispers that wouldn't be able to actually understand, or the screams of those I love. Hell, last time I had one, which was a few weeks back, it was a shadow that looked like a child. It was at the side of the edge of my bed and just started pounding on my bed, almost like a kid throwing a tantrum. I'm just wondering if anybody really had any insight what the fuck has been going on for the last 10 years. Story number 21. Thing that has happened since getting the Ouija board app. One thing that happened was it mentioned my Aunt Ruby. About 3 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail to the address, my address, but the name was Ruby. I have no clue why my mom gave it to me when she sorted the mail. She usually just gives the mail back to the mailman if the person doesn't live here. Since opening the app, I found a job, but it only lasted 2 weeks. At the job, I met a musician named Gary. I had previously heard a voice tell me, Gary, him, but I assumed the voice was talking about another guy named Gary that I know. It's just a coincidence because I write music. I wrote Gary a song, but he didn't give me any feedback. The creepiest, craziest thing that ever happened, though, was that I won the lottery. I got 4 out of 5 numbers and won about $400. After winning, I was randomly playing with the Ouija board app, and I asked about a job or how I was going to get money, and it replied, under the table. Thought it was going to say under the bed, but the lottery money is sort of like under the table money. I've seen shadows moving. My paper plate moved blatantly, and I looked closer and it moved again. I wasn't scared at all. I was just completely interested and intrigued. The last few times I checked, the spirit's name was Dora, and Dora is always next door sitting down. Let me know if you want or need me to ask Dora anything in particular. Story number 22. An experience I had. It was about 2015, and I was driving back from North Carolina to New York. It was about 4:30 a.m., and I was on the New Jersey Turnpike. For those of you who don't know, I-295 is about 120 miles, and about 100 of those are straight through a heavily forested area. So if you've ever driven on the interstate at night, you know how it is. Normally, you get into a pack with other vehicles. Call it subconscious or even a conscious decision, but normally around 5 or 6 vehicles will group up and drive together. So in this pack was me and my minivan, my wife and kids, a few other vehicles, and an 18-wheeler. I'm in the center lane and going about 80 miles an hour when something tells me to pull into the left lane and slow down. There was no reason, nothing urgent. It was almost an instinct. So I calmly did so. About a minute later, the 18-wheeler passes us in the center lane, and he gets about 20 feet ahead of us. All of a sudden, there's a whole herd of deer in the middle of the highway. I don't mean 1 or 2, I mean like 10. The 18-wheeler hits them first, and the bodies of the deer just fly to either side of the road. I remember seeing a deer fly in front of me and hit the ground, twitching. Nasty. Being that it's an 18-wheeler, I doubt he even got a scratch. No one slammed on their brakes or skidded out of the way. Of course, we all slowed down a tick, and I had to catch my breath, but my family and I were inches from death. If my minivan had hit that herd head-on, it would have been a total wipeout of my vehicle, and who knows how many vehicles behind me would have also crashed. Story number 23. Any opinions on what this could have been? I'd like to preface my story by saying that at the start, it'll seem like it just came from a weird case of sleep paralysis, but the more it goes on, the more unexplainable it becomes. Also, sorry if my English is bad. It's not my first language and I'm writing this on my phone. So, let's facilitate my typos. Well, writer, I will try. So, to start off the experience, I'll give some quick context. When my father drinks alcohol during the day, he snores a lot and makes my mom unable to sleep. So when he does drink, me and him usually change bedrooms. So I sleep with my mom, and he takes my bedroom. Now let's start the actual weird stuff. When I was sleeping with my mom, I suddenly faded into consciousness, and I saw standing in the back of the bed what looked like the silhouette of a child, looking a little like a more defined physical shadow person. I then fell asleep again and woke up with the silhouette standing on top of the bed by mine and my mom's feet. Before I fell asleep again, I woke up with the now much more visible child standing on top of the bed, standing by my torso. And then you guessed it, I fell asleep again. And then woke up for the last time in the night with the child, who I could clearly see now, standing by my side of the bed, staring at me. The child maybe looked 9 or 10 years old, but I don't know, I'm very bad at judging how old people are. They looked like they could either be a boy or a girl, and it was very hard to tell, but that was not their most prominent feature. That would easily go for the orange flames contained within both their pupils. This fire looked way too orange to be natural and moved in ways that felt in a way I couldn't quite put my fingers on. As the weird child stared at me, I noticed something also very weird. Even though the room was dark and I could barely see anything else, the child was clearly visible, almost as if the lights were on just for them. Another weird thing is that I wasn't creeped out or scared, but actually felt extremely at peace as those fiery eyes looked into my very essence. After a couple seconds, though, the peace was broken when the child finally moved, extending their hand as if wanting a handshake. For some reason, I complied and shook their hand, after which I fell into the floor without feeling any impact. I woke up the next day on the ground, but unharmed from falling off the bed and feeling refreshed despite the events of the night. With a name deeply ingrained in my mind, which is how I'll be referring to the child as Gabriel, I still wanted to be productive during the day though, so I got up and went to school. While in school, I couldn't focus on anything besides the fiery eyes of this child, bringing me to the first point that makes me think that it wasn't a nightmare or sleep paralysis. I have a fantasia, or a fantasia, which is a condition that makes me unable to picture anything in my mind. But despite this condition of mine, I could clearly see the fire in their pupils every time I closed my eyes, which is something I've never experienced with anything besides that flame. I can still see it if I think about Gabriel, which I do sometimes, just to circumvent my aphantasia, since imagining things is not anything I experience normally. I stayed silent about Gabriel to my family because I was afraid to scare my mom, who is deeply spiritual. After a couple of days, though, during lunch, my brother came through with a separate encounter with a woman combing her hair on his bed, which, to my surprise, made my parents angry. They were angry because he hadn't told them about it, because both my parents had seen similar things, with my mom seeing a priest and my dad a child, though that one was noticeably different from Gabriel. Older, clearly male, and blonde. So that's the second thing that makes me sure that Gabriel wasn't in my head. The third point is a bit different, though. Being largely immaterial in nature, after I shook Gabriel's hand, I noticed that my dreams became significantly more vivid, and I started having small cases of premonition. which were incredibly common in my childhood. That's the end of today's stories. Feel free to help us keep this channel going by dropping a comment, recommending it to other people, all that good stuff. See ya.